Well, God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you for logging on to our to another edition of this Clergy Conversation. And today, I'm so privileged, honored, excited, elated, thankful, grateful, all of that to interview one of God's great preachers, one of God's great pastors, and my friend and big brother, and who I'm glad to have this platform with. Reverend Dr. soon to be Reverend Dr. Jarvis Ellis, the proud pastor of the New Direction Christian Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So, big bro, thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on.
I got a while to go.
Well, you see, I just got my mass. I just got accepted, so I'm gonna get started in just a few minutes.
Man, listen, I'm grateful to I'm grateful to be here, man.
I appreciate it so much. So let's get right into it.
Man, welcome to the Anderson family. And
amen.
I'm grateful for us connecting each other.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I am too. So, big bro, let's get right into it. Tell us about your background and tell us, just where you're from. We'll start there. Did you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I said, tell us about your background and where you're from.
Yes, sir, man. I'm a Georgia native, so born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I was raised in Macon, Georgia. I am the eldest of two, so I'm an older brother.
Okay.
I married my high school sweetheart, Mallory. And together we have one son, Jarvis. I call him J2. My wife don't like that because she says it sounds like a sneaker, LeBron James sneaker or something. But and he's busy. And for the last 10 years, I've been serving here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as senior pastor here at New Direction Christian Church. And so, man, that's me in a nutshell. I'm a country boy living in the Midwest. I'm a Southerner. And as we were talking sort of before this thing started, we got a lot of snow on the ground. So,
right.
but man, I'm honored to be here.
Yes, sir. So talk to us about when did you first feel the call to preach, and how old were you when you first started preaching? Sure.
I grew up in a very traditional Pentecostal flavor church. So
okay.
We were large in charge. On a big Sunday, we would have probably about 50 to 60 members, and that was communion, and that was only once a month because everybody came to church on Communion Sunday to get their communion, and then we wouldn't see them for 2 or 3 Sundays.
Right.
But I grew up in a Pentecostal, charismatic kind of environment, and I've always been a church kid, always been a church boy. Was junior usher, junior deacon, choir member, worked on the tape ministry. When we had VHS, they don't do that no more. Might tell my age. But I knew God. I knew God wanted to do something with me in church. But in terms of a call to preach, it was probably around about 12 years old when I knew God had something for me to do. I was serious about the call to preach. But because of the environment that I grew up in, to where the church was taken seriously as it should, the preaching ministry taken seriously. So probably about 12 years old, I remember going to my pastor and sharing with him. I said, "Hey, pastor, I feel like, I'm called to be a preacher." And in typical Southern form, he told me, "Well, son, go back and pray."
Right.
And,
yes,
and so I was praying for 2 years. I would go to him and go back and pray. And he would always tell me, if you can abstain from preaching, you probably should. And so when Dr. H.B. Charles said a couple of years ago, it just sort of resonated with me. But I was about 12 years old. And that 2-year time span, my pastor told me to go back to pray. I was following him everywhere. I was like his shadow. I was reading everything. And one of my favorite books of the Bible is the book of Jonah.
Okay. Mine's too. Man,
I was the book of Jonah. And so I could identify with Jonah in a sense, not so much of running, but of this thing that God had called you to do. And then sort of yourself getting in the way. And so 12 years old, I began going to him, called to preach. And it was actually at 14 where they called it trial sermon. And I remember sharing a message from Jonah of when Jonah goes to the port at Joppa and gets swallowed up. And my message was, you can't run. And
Right.
that was by age 14. And
Okay.
yeah, that was by age 14.
So you said age 14, you got the call to preach, right?
Well, age 12. So age 12, I felt
Age
there
12.
was
Okay.
age 12. I felt I was serious about it. Age 12, I sort of called to preach. Everybody has this, this elaborate call to preach ministry. I just knew that's what God wanted me to do. And so when God spoke, I obeyed. But there was a process. So that time of 2 years, I was watching my pastor. I was really praying. And my pastor wanted to make sure that I was serious about it. But it was the age of 14 when I did what you call a trial sermon.
Absolutely. So how was it being 14 years old? You're starting out preaching, and you're also in high school, either high school at the time. So how was it being the young preacher and you're still trying to also have a social life?
Man, I was probably one of the hardest things.
Right.
So you're trying to discover who you are, and so trying to be cool and trying to fit in. But that when I had a really pretty good normal high school. I had friends who were part of our church community. They weren't a part of my immediate church family. And so I had a pretty normal childhood, even though I was a preacher. I went to the football games, even though I was a preacher. I went to parties and that kind of thing. Now, I didn't do everything everybody else did, but my parents were very adamant, particularly my mother was very adamant about me being a normal kid. And my mother had a lot of reservations, I think, probably initially around 12, of me saying, hey, I feel like God's called me to preach, because she didn't want me to try to grow up too fast or try to be something that I wasn't. And let me just backtrack a little bit. I had friends who were boy preachers who had started preaching like 8 and 9. And my mother saw them almost seem unhappy. There were churches that were sort of taking advantage of those young preachers and that kind of stuff. And so, that was my mom's concern. But I had a pretty normal high school. I didn't have really any issues. I had a lot of friends and that kind of thing. But a lot of my friends were affiliated with church and ministry. So a lot of my friends were in choir. They were musicians and that kind of thing. And we sort of flocked together. So I had a pretty normal high school experience. I had a really great one.
Okay. You can still hear me, right?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay, because we got a little freeze, but we'll get through it. We'll get through it. So as you are preaching and as you are growing, who were some of your influences? Who were some of your role models listening to throughout your preaching ministry?
Yeah. So Pentecostal. I grew up in a Pentecostal flavor. Every Sunday, I believe G. Patterson, I think he used to come on in Georgia like at 8:39. I would watch him religiously. So Bishop Gilbert Earl Patterson was always on. Bishop T.D. Jakes. Dr. Ralph West would come on Sunday mornings and Sunday afternoons. You can't be from Georgia and not be a fan of Dr. Charles Stanley. And so I enjoyed all of those. But on a local level, we had a lot of great preachers in my area. I grew up in Macon, Georgia. So Dr. E. Dewey Smith was pastoring right around the corner from us. His father, Pastor Eddie D. Smith Sr., where I served later after college on staff. And so Dr. I.E. Mack, there were just, a plethora of them. But Dr. Gilbert Earl Patterson, I admired the fact that he had the scholarly fact, but didn't seem to lose the anointing. I love Dr. Charles Stanley and how he taught, how he was able to be crystal clear and simple. Dr. Ralph West is a great storyteller, and how he was able to sort of dance with the text. And so those are the ones that really jump out to me. Of course, me and my friends were studying Dr. E.K. Bailey and C. Clark. I mean, there was Bishop Kenneth Omer. I mean, there were just a lot of influences, and we tried to be like everybody, like preach like all of them.
Right. Absolutely. So, and during this time, and you say you got to serve with Pastor E. Dewey Smith's father, which is wow. Talk to us about, because we know about E. Dewey Smith Jr., but also his father is a legend in his own right. So talk to us about how it was serving with Pastor Smith Sr.
Pastor Eddie D. Smith Sr. That's how you got to call his name. So we grew up in Macon. I would watch him on television. In fact, Pastor Eddie D. Smith Sr. was the first pastor in our local area that I saw do broadcast ministry. So he would come on 2 or 3 times a week. And this was in the early 90s, mid 90s. And my classmates were singing in the Macedonia church choir. And so, man, we would watch him, and he was astute. He was great with the text, very serious, his educated background. But I went off and I'm gonna be honest now, I grew up in the charismatic Pentecostal thing, but I felt Baptists were sort of stuck up, starch, dry. Now I'm Baptist now, but I'm just saying. And so I went off to college to a HBCU called Payne College in Augusta, Georgia. Went there and graduated my senior high school. There was an opening for a youth pastor in Macon, Georgia, my home. Now, I desired to stay in Augusta and was going to work and do that kind of, and even teach. And my wife's best friend, who is Eddie D. Smith Sr.'s granddaughter, Brittany, called me one Friday night and said, my grandfather is looking for a youth pastor. And Jarvis, I think you should apply. I think you'll be a great fit. I'm like, no, they traditional. He's a great preacher. No, I'm good. And I sort of put it off about 2 or 3 months. She called me again and said, the person they got, what didn't work out, would you at least go and just apply? I applied. Someone from the office called me that Monday. I never forget, a Monday morning, and invited me to come down and meet with him. Man, came and met with Dr. Eddie D. Smith Sr., and we just hit it off, down to earth, a wealth of knowledge. And he offered me a job on spot. And so I graduated. I graduated that May and went back home and served on staff. I served there for almost 3 years, and serving under him prepared me to pastor.
So, and that's why I want to get to that right there when you said serving under him prepared to pastor, because encourage us as young pastors, but also encourage us as young preacher about the importance of having, that Paul-Timothy relationship and learning from your Paul as a Timothy. Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. So when I graduated from Payne College in Augusta, Georgia, and went to serve, I was really just going to serve. And I was really just going to, do the youth pastor. And I never get one staff meeting. He pulled me to the side and he says, brother minister, you done been out of school for 6 months. What are you going to do next? And I said, well, Pastor Smith, I'm working here. I'm, doing stuff at the youth ministry. He says, no, I'm not talking about related to Macedonia. He says, when are you going to go to seminary? I said, Pastor Smith, I'm good. And he said something to me, and he said, preaching is not for those who are ignorant. And I remember it stung me because to know Pastor Eddie Smith, he does not bite his tongue. He is very straight to the point. And I said, Pastor Smith, what do you mean? He says, I don't hire ignorant preachers. Wow. I don't have ignorant preachers serving up under me. And he says, now where you are, he says, now what got you here? He says, what got you here was your bachelor's, but that's not going to keep you here. Right. And man, he introduced me to McAfee School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia, out of Mercer University. And he encouraged me to apply. And every Tuesday and Thursday, he would make sure I would leave the church by 2:00, drive an hour to work my master's degree. And he would always, and every time I would get back, every week he would ask me something he would ask me, what are you reading? What are you studying? And one thing I loved about Pastor Smith is he said, I don't care. And he would often tell me, he says, now I don't care how many books you read, how good you preach. Always remember, Macedonia ain't got but one pastor. Got but one pastor. And, but I understood what he was saying. But he stayed on me. Right. And the church, and I always say this, the church helped finance my theological education up until the point before I got called to serve here in Milwaukee. They were helping my tuition. Wow. For seminary. They set aside a fund. There was a scholarship fund that set aside that helped me with books and helped me with fees. And I'm forever indebted to that. But he had me doing everything. I was a youth and young adult pastor, but I was driving seniors to noonday Bible study, picking folk up, serving in the kitchen, running the SAM. And I was proud to do that because I wanted to be where Pastor Smith was. Pastor Smith is a genius of a man in terms of administration. Then I was sitting in on staff meetings and he would tell me, they'd be talking about budget. And he asked me, Jarvis, what do you think? And he says, well, why did you say that? Issue would come up with counseling. We had a full-time counselor. Now, this was unheard of in African-American church in our area to have a full-time counselor, full-time youth pastor, full-time children's pastor, full-time congregational care pastor. Wow. He had been doing it since like 92. And everything was debt-free. And so he stayed, but he made me understand the importance of serving. And he said something to me. He says, being a youth pastor is not a stepping stone. He says, God calls pastors. And I never forget, he would always tell me, son, get your lesson. And so I did. I went to school and got my lesson and graduated with my master's and that kind of stuff. But it was those years of serving up under him that gave me appreciation for the office of pastor, gave me appreciation for respecting people. I learned how to be a pastor, how to have the shepherd's heart. Now, during the time I was there was probably about 1,800 members, active. 2 services jam-packed, noonday Bible study jam-packed, 6:30 jam-packed. And Pastor Smith would do all of that, go visit the sick, go visit folk at the hospital. He would bury, he would marry, he would help with counseling. And he always showed me, just because you're in the senior pastor does not excuse you from being a pastor. Have a shepherd's heart. And I would drive him around and he would tell me, he says, I pastor because I know people and I get to know people. And he says, you cannot pastor them if there's no relationship. And so it was through him. My pastoral model is through him, through many of my mentors, my childhood pastor, Bishop Joseph Thompson, who's getting on now. I saw them going, visiting the people, and I was glad to do it because, there was no YouTube, there was no Facebook, none of that. So my vantage point of pastoring were those that I saw close up. I saw Bishop Gilbert or Patterson, but I didn't know what kind of pastor he was. I saw Dr. Ralph West, but I didn't know what kind of pastor he was. These were my local heroes who gave me a model for pastoring. And so it just blessed me. I would not be where I am today or the pastor I am today had it not been for serving and just being humble, humble.
Yes, sir. So when it comes to the serving, the being humble.
Yeah.
That's what I want to get to. Encourage us as young pastors and as young preachers. How do we get to that place?
Sure.
Where we can say, okay, where people can be comfortable with us and say, okay, this is my pastor. I can go to him. I trust in my pastor. But as you say, you have to have that servant's heart.
Yes. Yeah. Well, one of the things that Pastor Smith said, he says, now, minister, whatever you say, you do what you say and you say what you mean. And so he was real high on integrity. Never tell somebody you're going to do something, you're not going to do something. So if you say you're going to go to the hospital on Thursday, you need to go to the hospital on Thursday. If you say you're going to check in on them and that kind of stuff, you need to check in on them. And so character and integrity still matters. And he would always tell me, he says, now you might have a ministry gift, you might have a preaching gift, but it's only going to unlock so many doors. And I remember him telling me the doors that will open for you, that will change the trajectory of your life, will happen through being humble, through your character and your integrity. And then he would just start naming all of these people who were gifted, but who squandered an opportunity because they were arrogant. They focused more on the gift, the preaching part. They could hoop, they could tune, but they were horrible people. Their integrity wasn't good. They were not good husbands. They were not good fathers. And so Pastor Smith wanted to make sure that my devotional life and my character and integrity was intact before I got to the pulpit. And so one of the things that helped me tremendously, he would always remind me, keep me humble. You have not arrived, and you will never arrive. And I would see that in him. No matter how great Sunday was or what, Sunday was a production at Macedonia. In terms, of all the missing parts, the larger church, so there's a lot involved. But one of the things that blessed me is that after Sunday afternoon, on Sunday when service was done, he'd go into his office, all the preachers would gather around, and he says, now where did I mess up? What lesson, what did you learn from that?
Wow.
What can I do to be better? And he would always, we would have to submit our sermons to him. Yes, and that humbled us. So, yes, his thing was, I don't want any surprises on Sunday morning. So we had to submit our sermons to him. And he would edit. He would say, mark this and do this. And so I'm grateful for that kind of preaching, but you can't out-preach a lifestyle. And you can't out-teach a lifestyle. And wow. So you might have an anointing, you might have a preaching gift, but you got to make sure that your character and your integrity and your lifestyle matches up with whatever you're saying in that pulpit. So, he would often tell us more than, you getting the house. Is that you are living the lifestyle you're preaching about. And wow. So, being a young preacher, a boy preacher, and because from that time when I did my initial sermon at 14, and I had a lot of opportunities.
Yes, sir.
Most young preachers in that area had a lot. So, so I would preach places, and I would, of course, have to get my pastor's permission, and that was good too. Yes, sir. I never went anywhere without. There were times my pastor said, "Don't go," and I was angry with my pastor. Yes, sir. There were times Pastor Smith would ask me to fill in for Bible study like 30 minutes before noonday Bible study. And he would sit in. He would be there. He would sit in. And then after Bible study, he would critique me and says, and said, you talk too fast. You're talking too fast. That wasn't theological sound. That wasn't biblical. Minister, you got to dress like you're a minister. And so, everything he wanted to make sure that we were good people, but also good clergymen. And so that character and integrity was vital. And so it prepared me for where I am. So advice that I'll give a young preacher is never believe the hype. I don't care how gifted you are, how anointed you are. If your character and your lifestyle does not line up with what you're preaching about, you'll only go so far. And you'll have a fan club, but you won't build disciples.
Woo, woo. Wow. That's a word. You have a fan club, but not build disciples. Yeah. My goodness. So talk to us, big bro, about when you got the call to become pastor. How did that happen?
I'll never forget it. Me and my wife were talking about this a couple months ago. October the 30th, 2011, my father's birthday. I'm driving to Savannah, Georgia. I love Savannah, Georgia. Me and my wife had the honeymoon in Savannah, Georgia. I'm driving there to preach for a church, Tremont Temple, as a candidate. They had narrowed it down to 2 preachers, and I'm driving there to preach, and I get a call from this church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And let me back up. So one night in class, in my seminary class, my professor, Dr. Skip Johnson, who is from Milwaukee, said He said, he pulled me to the side after class. He says, "Hey, Jarvis, I need a favor from you." I said, okay, Doc Johnson, what's going on? He said, "Man, I'm scheduled to preach at my mama's church, and they're looking for a pastor, and I can't make it this weekend. I need you to go in my stead. I'm going to handle all of the flights and stuff like that." I said, "Okay, Doc, where's it at?" He said, "Milwaukee." I said, "Milwaukee, Georgia?" He said, "No, Doc, Wisconsin." No, Doc, no. He said, "Jarvis, I just want you to go preach. You're not going to be a candidate for the pastor. Just go preach." So I told my wife, I said, "Hey, what do you think?" We went to Milwaukee for that weekend. And when I got there that weekend, a group of people picked me up and said, "We're so happy that you agreed to come out and be one of our candidates." I said, No, Doc. I'm here to fill in for Mother Johnson's son, Dr. Skip. I'm just here to fill in. And they said, "Well, Dr. Johnson said you'd be a good fit as a candidate, and he recommended you." I said, "No." I said, "Listen, my mama is in Georgia. My wife's family is in Georgia. We are Southerner people." I said, "I'm humbled and happy to be here, but I don't want to be submitted as a candidate. I'm good." And so I preached that weekend, and that Sunday night, as we're getting ready to leave from the General Mitchell Airport in Milwaukee, my wife said, "I feel like God is going to place us here in Milwaukee." I said, "Whoa, don't say that, time out. No, they got snow here. No, we are Southerners." I'm like, "Girl, you don't know nothing about no snow." And no. When it's snow in the South, we shut down. And my wife,
you're right.
She was very adamant. No, she says, "I feel like God's going to put us here." And I knew something was different because my wife was open. I had preached at the church in Savannah a couple of times, and they were very sweet people, but my wife was just not. She would have went, but she was just not. She says, "Oh, I don't know." She would always say, "I'll follow you as you follow Christ."
Right.
And so we got on the plane that Sunday night, and I was adamant about not going. And for like that 3 months after the time I went, God started working on me, and God started dealing with me. And I said, "No, God." And about September, I went back to Dr. Johnson, my professor. I said, "Hey, Dr. Johnson, has your mom's church got a pastor yet?" He said, "They narrowed it down, but one of the candidates got called to another church, and another candidate withdrew his name, so they can really start the search back over." And I said, I'm thinking about being a candidate. He says, "I thought you told me you didn't want to go." I said, "Well, I just want to be open. I don't want to regret." Submitted my resume as a candidate. They flew me up to preach one time, and maybe like 30 days later, I was called as their pastor.
Wow.
And I got called on my father's birthday, and I got called as I'm on the way to Tremont Chapel in Savannah to preach for the very last time. I get midway there. I get a call from Great Faith Missionary Baptist Church. "We have voted. We've called you as our pastor." I had to call Tremont Temple and said, "I've just been voted in as pastor, and I've accepted the call." I can't tell you what they said to me.
No, you can't say that. You can't say that. No. Leave that alone. Leave that alone.
but they were hoping that I would go. And that was back in 2011. Been here 10 years, and man, we have not looked back. And I'm grateful for all the more of coming here. They made me a better person.
So, big bro, talk to us about that, because you hit on something very important. Are you open? And not just are you open, but it's also important to have a spouse who's open. So talk to us about, because Georgia, you say, is home. So now you're leaving home all together. You and your wife are both leaving home. So talk to us about being open, not just as a pastor, but now as a husband, and now also the importance of having a wife who is open as well. Talk to us about that.
Man, I've been incredibly blessed in that of Mallory, because my wife is a prayer warrior. She is, man, probably one of my greatest critics, but probably one of my, I tell her she's my secret weapon.
Right.
And when we got married, I was just a minister. I was not a pastor. And one of the things how I knew God was working with my wife and she remained open. When I went there, I wanted to pastor in Georgia,
Yes,
to
sir.
be closer to home. And I told God, I'll pastor anywhere, but I want to stay close to mom. I want to stay close to home. And so I was closed off to any other thing, because in order for me to move, it had to look a certain way. It had to feel a certain, it had to be a certain type of membership. Now, remember I'm coming from a larger church, serving on a larger staff. So I'm in a context where I've got insurance and benefits and travel reimbursement. And so Great Faith at the time was a smaller church. It was in the inner city. Their pastor had died. It was an older congregation. I'm coming from a very younger, vibrant congregation, and they were very traditional. The deacons would every Sunday line hymns, and and we didn't have that at Macedonia. Pastor
Right.
Smith, Pastor Smith would do it, but we were very contemporary, and with it, there were cameras, there were screens. We have none of that at Great Faith, and so. I was closed because in order for my attendance to go up, it had to look a certain way. It had to feel a certain way. And so in so many ways, I brushed the people off my first time just preaching and filling in. And my wife said, I feel like God is calling us here. And one of the things when my attendance went up with my wife, it's because my wife is not a in front person, but when she opens her mouth, it's because she's prayed about it. She's laid before God about it, and God is directly speaking to her. And so any preacher who's dating, who is engaged, make sure you get someone that don't just look good, but someone who has a heart for God and who has your best interests at heart. And so I was open because she was open. Mm-hmm. The situation at one church in Savannah, she, great people, but she never could just feel that it was going to be a good fit. Mm-hmm. She said, they enjoy your preaching. But she says, I don't see you being their pastor. Mm-hmm. And I was hard-headed. I kept going, kept pushing. But in terms of being open, oftentimes young preachers make the mistake, or preachers in general make the mistake of only wanting to be submitted or pastor churches that already have all of the packaged things. And so I stayed. My wife being open is what opened me up. But when I got there, I recognized why God sent me there. I came from a church that had Family Life Center, gym, buildings, and stuff like that. And God sent me there because God needed me there to disciple the people, but to build and to develop me. And it's just as much as they needed me, I needed them. Wow. And so they taught me how to pastor. I was 26. I had never pastored before. I'm out of seminary, but had never pastored before. But I love people. And so, and then Pastor Smith, Pastor Smith told me the same thing. I was telling him about, I was like, Pastor Smith, no, they old pastor. I'm young. I want to do, I want the church to be here. And he told me, God, you don't get to choose the assignment. The assignment chooses you. God gives pastors according to his heart. Wow. And as much as you think you want to be somewhere, you do not get to tell God where to place you. And my wife was the first one, Pastor Smith, and then my mama. My mama says, I want to keep you here, but God's going to use it somewhere else. And so God used those people to confirm what I had already knew deep down. And so God gave me, I often call my journey from Macon to Milwaukee my Genesis 12.
Yes, sir.
And of leaving family, kindred, a familiar place. And he says, but if you go, I'm going to bless you. And so I've been blessed in every way. That's
a great story. So now you're in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So talk to us about how it was starting in those first couple of years in the transition from Georgia to Milwaukee.
My first Sunday in Milwaukee, we moved in December. Now, we crazy. We moved in December. My first Sunday was the first Sunday in December. It had snowed the night before. I woke up that morning, December the 4th. I never forget it. It was snowing. And so when I came to Great Faith at the time, they had 8 o'clock service and a 10:45 service. So when I woke up at maybe 6:30 or so, 7:30 is still so. I'm like, oh, it's snowing, so church is closed. And so I didn't go to the 8 o'clock service. When the deacon said, Pastor, where are you at? You missed the 8 o'clock service. I said, I'm at home, man. It's snowing. And it was snowing, Don. Not just it was snowing. And he says, I said, I know you. I'll see you all for Wednesday for Bible study. He says, Pastor, you missed the 8 o'clock service, and folk were here looking to hear from you. I said, y'all didn't shut church down? Pastor, we don't cancel in the Midwest. We have church. The deacons drove to my house, picked me and Mallory up, and I made it in time for the 10:45 service. So that's how it started, with a snowstorm.
Wow.
And all throughout that, I did a lot of administrative work when I was there. So I didn't try to change anything. And I often tell young preachers, when you go, love the people, preach Christ, and go home. Now, I know I got some seminary professors, some people would disagree with me on that, but it ultimately is up to God to change the people. And so I understood that when I went there, although they called me their pastor, I was not their pastor. And Pastor Smith told me that you are not their pastor. You're their preacher. And your name might be on the van, your name might be on the bulletin. You are not the pastor. And you won't be the pastor for a very long time. So the first couple of years, I'm just preaching on things, prayer, unity. I'm preaching on family. I'm not doing these revival sermons. I am preaching to build disciples. And so for the first year, I preached on Ephesians, I preached on Acts, and God literally just started growing the church. I'm just teaching the Bible. I didn't use any methods. I just taught the Bible, loved the people, and slowly but surely, I eventually became the pastor. And so my first 2-3 years, my first year, there were 100 people that united with the church and joined. So we went from probably about 150 within the first year to about 250. And then every year there were 75 here, there were 100 here. And at the height of Great Faith, there were 800 members on roster. And I was singing out of that 800, I was singing about 650, 660 between 3 services. So we had 8 o'clock service, the 9:15 and the 10:30. And God just began to grow. Blow my mind. And people often ask, well, what were you doing those? Man, I'm just loving the people. I'm getting to know them. They're getting to know me. Now, you got to keep in mind, it was just me and my wife. So our son wasn't born. So we would go to family reunions with people. They invite us to stuff. We would go, and we weren't going to impress them. We were going because we genuinely cared about the people. And it was in those moments, it was at the funerals, it was at the weddings that I became the pastor. I didn't become the pastor by my sermons in the pulpit. Now that helped, but I became the pastor in Bible study. My Pastor Smith always told me, who shows up in Sunday school and Bible study, those are your leaders, and that's your church. Folks who show up on Sunday morning, that's the crowd.
Wow.
You need to be concerned about the church. And I would get, Pastor Smith told me, he says, disciples come during the week, but the crowd show up on Sunday. And your job is to pastor the disciples and teach them that sheep beget sheep. And the church just began to grow.
Wow. So you're at Great Faith, and then New Direction comes. So how did that happen?
Great question. So I'm pastoring Great Faith. I'm in my 5th year. Church is growing tremendously. But as the church is growing, probably into my 4th year, where I'm noticing some friction. And every pastor goes through those seasons. And my 4th year, I'm noticing some frictions. I started hearing things around the church. He got all these young people up in here. These are all these people we don't know anything about. And now these are people who call me the pastor, who were very nice to me and that kind of stuff. But once my 5th year, it was just friction. We're having what I call the generation war. So we've got, people are really tripping about you sitting in my seat. And no, you got to get up. And you can't do this ministry. You ain't been here long enough. And I'm having to navigate through that. Long story short, church started growing, and it was growing faster than what a group of people probably wanted. And so around March, there was this we had not a church fight, but we were in a meeting, and I could sense it wasn't going to go right. I could sense it wasn't going to go right. Now, now here's my pastoral style. I am very team. I work with people. But when my mind is made up, my mind is made up.
Right.
And that meeting in March was just rough. Probably the roughest church meeting I've ever been involved in. I was being accused of trying to control their church and trying to grow into a mega church. And I had no desires. Remember, I came from a church, we were 50 members. So I had no concept of that. And so around about March, we were getting ready to install a new set of leaders. And some of these were deacons. Some of these were staff people. And they were people whom had sort of come under my pastorate. And some of those who were in leadership at the time, Pastor, you don't have the authority to do that. No, Pastor. These folk are your members. They're not members of our church. And we just feel like we just want to keep things. And what was actually said, we want to just keep things the way it was when you got here. So they had no problem as long as I was being directly connected to them. But the minute it started getting, and I'm not, and to this day, let me just say this. I love Great Faith to give me an opportunity. But it became every week, it was a different battle. And not a different battle about, anything with kingdom. It was just these church wars. I'm baptizing people who had never been in church before, who had never had a pastor. I'm battling people who were in the streets and drug dealers. And our church was in the inner city. So we had crack addicts and prostitutes, and they were coming to church, and it became an issue. And that was in March, big church meeting. And I said, I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to love God's people and to pastor. I didn't come here to fight. That was in March. And man, April, May, June, I had just had enough. And I remember talking to my pastor, and I had plans to come. And I said, Pastor, I just can't do it no more. This is my last year here. I just can't do it no more. And he said, if you want to come home, come home. Come home. In those last couple of months, I knew it was time for me to come because I was preaching wounded.
Right.
I'm trying to get them. And I knew that's not the role of the pastor. Your job at the pulpit is not to whip on folk and try to correct folk. And I knew I can't do that. God began to whip up on me. And so June, I never get it. The first Sunday in June, we had service, and the church was packed. I had preached an 8 o'clock service, the 9:15 service, get to the 10:30 service. And I said, I'm done. And I never forget it. The church was completely shocked. I had enough. I started to get bitter and resentful. And I had a point, I was like, you know what? And my exact resignation, God didn't call me to fight. I'm going to go home. I love y'all. Thank you for the opportunity. And when I walked out that back door, I walked out the back door, about 200 folks said, Pastor, where we going? I said, I'm going home. I don't know where y'all going. I'm going home. And one of the members said, well, Pastor, okay, you're going back to Georgia. Can we just meet with you at the library? And this was on a Monday. So I told my wife, and we're making plans to go back to Georgia. And told my wife, I said, some of the members want to meet with us, at the Capitol Drive Library in Milwaukee. Met there, and my usher president said, Pastor, it's time to go into a new direction. People think I came with new direction.
So your members came up with new direction.
Yeah. My usher president said, it's time to go into a new direction. I said, wow. And she says, Pastor, if you stay here, we need a pastor. And I remember telling them, I've never started a church, never church planted a church. I've never done any of that. I have no experience. I said, I will give it a shot. I'll pray about it. And we started meeting for Bible study. A couple Sundays we had service, and we haven't looked back. That's been over 5 years now. And the church has grown tremendously. So we went from having no ministries, no members, no building. Dr. Andrew Calhoun heard what was going on with the inner struggle with the church. offered me up his worship space on the same Sunday at 8 o'clock in the morning. We had our first service at 8 o'clock, jam packed. 86 people joined that first service, and people just kept joining. Within 2 years, we were able to raise money and purchase our own building on 8 acres in the city of Milwaukee. Now that Milwaukee is the city. And so we were able to purchase a church, man, free and clear, with land to grow. And man, we've been there in that location at that campus, man, for over 3 years, going on the 4th year. And man, God has just been faithful. Now we're pre-pandemic, we're at about 450. And man, I'm just grateful to be a part of the process. But it was that group of people that said it's time to go into a new direction, and we need our pastor. I mean, I haven't looked back. And so New Direction was planted really out of great faith, Missionary Baptist Church. And my desire was not to split the church, to do any of that. They're still going on. There's no animosity or anything like that. It really was, and to their benefit, they were truthful. They just really wanted to sort of keep it where it was. That was it. And so but that's how New Direction Christian Church got started. Man, I'm just grateful to be a part of what God has done and what God is still doing.
Now that's amazing. And I just want to say, after we get done, if you have not seen New Direction, those who are watching, go look it up, because Big Bro it's a beautiful church. It's a beautiful edifice. So, Big Bro, then let me ask you this question. As you're talking about your testimony, how encourage somebody who may feel like, I'm at that place where I'm done. I want to start fresh. I'm tired of this, but not just that. And also, you talked about preaching, but you were bitter and you had these wounds. And H. Beaker Hicks has a great book, and I mean, that I do preaching through a storm and preaching while you're bleeding. But talk to us about how is it preaching while you're wounded, but then you have to see these members who once were your biggest fans, but now they become your biggest adversaries. And not only that transition to now it's like, you know what, I'm done. And then you get to this new spot. Now you can see, okay, God, it's like God had to send me through the storm, but now I've gotten through it. And now I see, okay, because clearly there were some people who you weren't their pastor, but you found out you were pastor of some people in that church. So just talk to us about that. Yeah.
Every pastor goes through storms as a pastor. And Pastor Smith went through storms, and my childhood pastor went through storms. But until you're in the driver's seat, and people always talk about church hurt, but they don't talk about pastor hurt and what it does to the heart of a shepherd.
Yes, sir.
It is one of the most hurtful things in the world. And it takes maturity. It takes grace to not preach how you feel.
Wow.
And there were some Sundays I failed. I would see their faces and I would, go back to a conversation, go to a phone call, or, go to a confrontation. It was just, and I was preaching depressed. I was just depressed. And I was there, but I wasn't there. There was this disconnect. And, I used to hear preachers say you should just preach your way through. That might not always be the most healthiest option. Sometimes you need to step back. But every pastor I had seen had done that. Preach your way through. And I think for me, it probably did more damage than good. Preaching is therapeutic. Don't get me wrong, it's very therapeutic. But if you're not whole, you're bleeding on folk.
Wow.
So I'm trying to get a message across, and I'm wounding folk who showed up for Sunday morning to get a word. And I had a couple mentors that pulled me to the side and say, Jarvis, you're wrong. And I had to receive that. And they were absolutely right. So preaching through that, man, I struggled with depression. I shut down. So I would only go to the church Bible study Sundays. Before that, you couldn't get, I was at the church almost, 6-7 days a week. But when you're going through a storm, isolated, I was overeating. Just all of that, man. You name it, went through it. and disconnected from my wife because she didn't understand. It's hard to sort of share the things that I was going through. And man, it was just rough. And so when I resigned in June, I'm just exhausted, bro. I mean, I'm drained and in so many words, feel like nothing I have to give. So when they were talking about planting a church, I'm like, I'm time out. I need to go somewhere and rest. And which is what we started out for a lot of part with a Bible study. And I kid you not, every week, man, God would just strengthen me. God just began to give me strength. I started talking. I got a therapist, and every pastor needs a counselor that is not related to you, that is not related to the church, and that helped me as well to sort of talk some things out. But man, during that time, it's a new assignment in a way. It was exciting. But God started to restore me. And I never forget one of our first Bible studies. I had to apologize to New Direction, to those who had called me to pass, who had, planted the church with me. I said, prior to this assignment, I was just drained and bitter. And I said some things in the pulpit I had no bit, and I apologized, and even apologized to the church. No matter how jacked up they didn't, just apologize. Because I understood that if God was going to bless the work, we had to do it the right way. And yes, so those early years of New Direction, man, were fun and exciting because it was almost like I was planning a new church and I was having fun again, having fun preaching, having fun teaching. God, man, literally just, man, hit the reset button. But for every pastor that goes through those seasons, get you someone who you can just talk freely without being judged. And sometimes that's your wife. Sometimes it's not your wife. I didn't share a lot with my wife because I didn't want my wife. Now they call me the pastor. My wife ain't the pastor. She'll tell you, absolutely. I married Jarvis, not pastor. So her job was to protect me. So a lot of times I didn't share because I didn't want her to be bitter towards church or towards people.
Absolutely.
I was so grateful that even during that season, we didn't have children. So my heart goes out for pastors who go through those seasons. They've got kids and their children see that and become bitter towards the church and that kind of thing. But it was very therapeutic for me to just go and sit on someone's couch and just sort of talk about, being wounded and being betrayed. And, I'm 843 miles away from home. And my first response was, you brought me over here to mistreat me. Right. Y'all asked me to pastor.
Absolutely.
Y'all called me to pastor. And so dealing with that, not being resentful and not that kind of stuff. And those who were very excited about me coming were some of the ones that, knives in my back. And I never I read somewhere where the tables turn, and it does. And so I went through that season. The first year of New Direction was a lot. It was healing for me. Absolutely. A lot of healing for me. I was more transparent when I was at Great Faith Church of Growing. I was not as transparent until I was wounded. Bad example. And a lot of my members had no idea that I was wounded. The shepherd was wounded. And so when I started being more transparent in the pulpit, it endeared the members to me. They were like, Pastor, you need to rest, self-care. My first year, New Direction sent me on vacation and I took off a month, and I had never done that. But they were adamant about, we need a healthy pastor. We want a pastor that is whole. And so be honest with the people, be transparent. And those seasons, I knew when to step away. So now when I feel myself, even with this pandemic last year, I took off 2 months. I spread them out, pandemic, because I felt myself working more. So every pastor needs a good outlet. I don't care if it's working out. I don't care if it's, just doing something crazy, going to the movies, that kind of stuff. But you got to be able to know your triggers. And that's one of the things that I would share with every pastor. You got to know your triggers and know when you're getting there, when it's a good time to sort of step back. And so that helped me.
Wow. Now that's amazing. Cause I got a couple more questions. Cause I know, you've been so generous with your time. Talk to us then, big bro, about this, about when a pastor has to be honest with himself. And cause like Magic Johnson said it like this in ESPN 30 for 30, Celtics versus Lakers, the best of enemies, where he said self-evaluation is tough. So talk to us about when a pastor has to have a self-evaluation with himself. Because you are encouraging so many, you just don't know it, that you had that self-evaluation. At some point, you had to have that self-evaluation. So talk to us about, when is it healthy for a pastor, and when a pastor needs to kind of have that self-evaluation with themselves and check themselves and see, okay, it's time for you to step back.
Yeah. You know, the easy thing would be to blame how I felt, the attacks and stuff, all on those people at Great Faith. But a lot of it was immaturity. Now, I don't want to blame it, because I know pastors who've been at their first church, still at their first church. I got called when I was 26. So I'm growing up and pastoring at the same time.
Right.
And to any church that's watching, give the pastor grace and space enough to grow up and to be himself. And so every pastor that I had prior to was older, was more mature. And so I modeled a lot of that. And I started as a boy preacher. And so many ways I'm missing my child, but just a lot of immaturity. I'm trying to, you know, have conversation with members that Pastor Smith had. Pastor Smith had been pastoring people 30 and 40 years. And he had that kind of relationship with them. And so, you know, but it took me being honest. I had to recognize all of it wasn't their fault. A lot of it was on me. I was an emotional times pastor. I would say things without thinking. I would say things sometimes without praying about it as I should have. And it backfired on me. Now, the cop out would be to sort of say, well, you know, you pay all the respect to office of pastor, and they should, don't get me wrong, and they should. But a pastor's also got to be honest with himself. When, you know what, there are some seasons to where, you know what, you were wrong, you were foul. And I think that comes with every pastor should have an accountability team of some honest people who you're open and honest, because oftentimes we share our portion, but that ain't the whole story. And I never forget, I was talking to one of my college pastor in Augusta, Pastor C.D. Roberts, and I'm sharing with Doc, they ain't doing this, and they ain't doing this, and they ain't doing this. And I'm just complaining, and he's completely quiet. I'm just like, Doc, they ain't doing this. And I feel like they ought to be doing this. And when he said, are you done? I said, yeah. He says, now what are you not doing?
Wow. What are you not doing?
And man, it helped me. It was a hard pill to swallow, because I remember getting off the phone being angry with him, being upset with him. Doc, you're supposed to be on my side. And Doc, he was right. And he said, now tell me what you did. It's almost like when your kids, and you go tell on your sister, your sibling, Mama, they did this, Daddy did this. And your parents say, now what did you do? What part did you play in it? And that was a sobering pill for me to sort of say, you know what, I handled that wrong. I overreacted. I should have nipped it in the bud. And so, but that comes with, I think it comes with maturity and growth, being honest with yourself. Most pastors lie to themselves, being honest with yourself, but also surrounding yourself with people who love you enough to tell you the truth, who are not impressed with you, who ain't, you know. So my pastor's, you know, keeping me accountable. How are you spending time? How much do you pray? Are you spending much time? Are you know? When the last time you and your wife went on a date? That kind of stuff. So having people who are accountable, who are going to be keen, keep it real with you. And so I switched my whole entire circle up. I did. I had friends who, yeah, Doc, and so now I check in. And that's a humbling thing, because a pastor, you know, people should be checking in with you. I mean, normally people check in with you. I check in. Every pastor needs a pastor. And those early years, I leaned quite a bit on my pastors. But when things weren't going well, I didn't call. And then when I did call, I'm sharing what they did and not what sort of provoked it. And so it comes from just having an accountability team and being honest with yourself.
Now that was major. So that's very helpful, because, you know, I always like to check on Big Bro to say, how's he doing? How you doing? You know, I love to do that. So we do that all the time. So then a couple more questions, then we'll be through.
Sure.
Talk to us about building a preacher's library, because you're talking about reading and learning from those great men and building a library, and your sermon process, you know, as you are a pastor, even when you were at Greater Faith, but now you're at New Direction, you know, building library first, but then talk to us about, you know, your preaching and the preparation, and then, you know, what do you know, just talk to us a little bit about those things.
So I was blessed. Because even my childhood pastor was not seminary trained,
Okay.
but he was well read. He was well read, and so which was why when I when his thing was you go to college and get you a degree, so you have to depend on the church to take care of you.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily go to seminary. So he wasn't seminary trained, but he was well read. So he would whenever he would be reading the newspaper, he'd be reading articles, he'd be reading different things. And so that gave me a love for reading things beyond the Bible.
Yes, sir.
But when I was at Macedonia, it was Pastor Smith who exposed me to expository preaching. It was Pastor Smith who talked to me about, building libraries. So we would get books on John and books on Paul, and he actually exposed me to logos.
Yes, sir.
I had never heard of logos. So he exposed me to logos and just sort of, the importance of getting books and that kind of thing. And so I started out very slow. In fact, whenever I would go to his office, I would always notice he had these big bookshelves. And I'm like, Pastor ain't reading all the books. And he did. And every time I would go, he would tell me, bro, minister, take a book. And then come back and report to me in a week or so what you thought about it. Wow. And the more I read, the better I became in my preaching. And so my love for books in the library actually came from just watching him and him sort of staying on me. And so now I'm buying books on Amazon, man, all the time. I am, and I'm not just buying books on preaching. I'm buying books on everything, pastoral care, on counseling, and that kind of stuff. But my library has developed over the years from when I've been in seminary, when I haven't been in seminary. But every preacher needs to probably start out in terms of the library of, Logos is very, very affordable. So I would do that. But when I would go to like the conventions and that kind of stuff, while people are getting suits and that kind of stuff, man, I'm going on getting books. And oftentimes those books have been great investments. And so that's sort of what developed my library. My goal now is to try to read a new book every week. I just finished reading a great book that was a good recommendation from Dr. Charles Goodman in Augusta Tabernacle called Anonymous. Okay. It talks about the years of Jesus' ministry. So I'm reading books on leadership. And because I remember Pastor Smith telling me you can learn a lot from people who are not preachers. And so we had a lot of educators. We had a lot of educators, school teachers. And so, man, that became, those became valuable tools and resources for me. And so, man, I just began to just pick up books wherever I can. I've got New Testament, Old Testament books. I've got a lot of commentaries. H.B. Charles has been great for me in terms of providing a guideline for building a library. Blogs, I'm reading blogs and that kind of stuff. So the preacher and the pastor needs to be well read, because you are everyone is not thinking like you. And so my goal is to take everything that I've read throughout the week, whether it be something that is theological, whether it can be a magazine, and to pull something out of it that can minister to people where they are. And so I read now for fun, but I also read to develop my craft, to be able to minister to a diverse population. In terms of the preaching, I start my sermons on Sunday evening. I'm starting with just prayer. God, what do you want to have me say, people? But when I'm starting with prayer, I'm thinking about the faces of those who are sitting in a congregation. Where can we improve? If we're trying to work on unity, if we're trying to work on discipleship, if we're trying to work on stewardship, I'm praying about that. I'm getting my commentaries. I'm got logos up. But I'm starting on Sunday. I'm starting simply with prayer, and I'm got little sticky pads all over the house, and I'm writing down what God is saying out of prayer. A good pastor and preacher has a great devotional life, and so when I'm in prayer, I'm not going to God with a long laundry list. I'm going, what is God saying in this? Me and my wife are fasting and praying, and we pray at 6, 12, and noon. And every morning I'm waking up and I'm just going to God in prayer. Our devotional scripture today was from Hebrews 13 and 5 and 6, where James is saying, and the writer is saying, and so we say with confidence that the Lord is our guide. He's our helper.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading the Bible, man, writing thoughts from prayer life. That's Sunday night. Monday or Tuesday, I'm developing thoughts. I'm writing everything. I'm developing thoughts from that. So if God is, talking about the help, I'm looking at everything that are according with that. I'm writing down thoughts where I'm trying to go, and I just start building a sermon outline. I'm not trying to write a whole sermon. I'm just writing thoughts and major movements of that text and what I feel it's saying, and then I'm getting a commentary to actually hear exactly what it's saying.
Right.
And from that, I am trying to pull out 3 or 4 foundational movements or 3 or 4 take-home truths that I can drive home. I am expounding on that verse by verse, and I'm writing a full manuscript by Friday or Saturday. By Thursday, I'm writing a full manuscript. Friday, I'm trying to commit it to memory. So I'm doing a lot of my heavy lifting in terms of the writing. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm writing it out. Every word, I write out every word.
Yes, sir.
I'm a manuscript preacher. Now, I got that from Pastor Smith. My childhood pastor was a manuscript, so I'm writing out every word. Friday, I'm trying to get in my system, so I'm trying to memorize it. Saturday, same thing. But I don't do anything. I'm old school. My wife says I'm young old. By 2:00 on Saturday, after I've done errands and that kind of stuff, I'm doing nothing. I'm just simply reading through the sermon, but I'm doing nothing. I'm resting. I'm going to I'm just relaxing. I'm not out and about, but I'm home, resting with the family, getting my mind off it. And then on Sunday morning, I'm up about 4:00, 4:30, and I'm going over my sermon. And I'm taking a full manuscript to the pulpit, whether it be in paper or my iPad Sunday morning. And so, and then when I finish preaching that, I'm starting again. But I preach in series because it helps me stay focused. And pastoral wise, it has helped me really grow my church. One writer says vision leaks. So you got to keep repeating it because it's going to leak. Wow. And so I'm a sermon series preacher. And each week I'm just trying to give you one thought to go home with. Not if you don't get all points, that's cool. I'm trying to give you, this is the main thing I want you to hear. And Dr. John Adolph has been a great example of that. Just watching him and being a mentor from afar of that take home truth. And so that's sort of my process. It's changed over the years too.
Right. Well, I've learned from becoming a new pastor. Yeah, those Sundays keep coming. They keep coming. So one thing I do, after Wednesday night, I try to I pray about my Bible study. So I had to work on that Saturday, just to get that through. And then of course Sunday, after church, I'm downtime. For me, sports helps with that. So then I'm already thinking about what's next. But sometimes, I'm already writing it out, like write some stuff out now. So I get where you're going with that. So no, that's very helpful. Very helpful. Very helpful. So I told my pastor, my father mentioned, series preaching. I see why series preaching is a God. It's because when you already know where you're going, you ain't got to. Yes, it's a godsend. Now there are some people who can, they can preach something, different week and pick a sermon, a passage. That doesn't work for me based upon my personality. I can be all over the place. And so sermon series helps me drive home. It gives me another opportunity. If I miss something one week, I can come back and sort of reiterate it and then sort of expound on that. And it's for me, it's easier. Now, some people say it's not. For me, it's easier. Like you said, I already know where I'm going. I already know the vein I want to go into. And so, series preaching for me is the best preaching in terms of pastoral wise. But if I'm on revival, I'm writing a new sermon or something like that. Try to be respectful to the house. Yeah. Yes, sir. Well, big bro, like I said, I know we went a little over, but I thank you so much for this conversation. Is there anything that you want to share with us? Or any other advice you want to share? It's definitely share with share with us about your church, location
Sure.
and stuff like that. So if anybody's ever in Milwaukee, they can definitely stop by, and then share anything else. Any other encouraging word, just anything else that's on your heart. You have the floor. Just share with us.
Man, Chris, man, thank you so much, man, once again for having me. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I wish I had this kind of opportunity to watch as a younger minister. I think this is great. I think it's because I think in a time that we're living in, clergy, preachers have always been sort of divided and sort of against each other in competition. So it's great to just sort of have the conversation. I enjoyed last week with Dr. Scott, who is a mentor that I've watched from afar from when he was in St. Louis and now doing amazing work there in Charlotte. But I'm grateful, man. I'm just a country boy from Georgia and don't have all of the answers. But I stand, I guess the biggest thing, man, is I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, people that have labored before me and people who are still rooting for me.
Yes, sir.
My church, New Direction Christian Church, as we talked about it, is located at 2127 West Garfield Avenue. We are completely virtual. We have been virtual almost all of last year. We don't know when we're going to go back into the building. But once we get back in, 7:45, 10 a.m. service, Bible study Wednesdays, noon and at 6:30. And we're affectionate as a church for the whole family because I really believe God has given us a grace to be one church, but ministering to multiple generations. And I got that concept from Dr. E. Dewey Smith and from Pastor Eddie D. Smith Sr. and from Dr. Gary McIntosh, who talks about the multi-generational church. The advice that I would share with any preacher, any young preacher, is keep working on your craft. You have not arrived. Read, study, prepare. Call to preach is a call to prepare. And get you some friends who you can be honest and transparent with. Bishop Joseph Walker has a new book out that I'm reading that talks about leadership loneliness. It is a lonely journey.
Yes, sir.
And we cannot do this by ourselves. We need each other. And so, Chris, thank you so much, man, for having me. I'm leaning on you as we lean on each other and we get through this.
Sir.
But man, thank you, man, for the conversation, for the opportunity, for just to sort of share my story. Yes, and my journey. And man, I'm just grateful. Thank you so much, man. I enjoyed this.
Oh, I did too. I appreciate it. You don't know how much you helped me, and you don't know how much you've helped others. Because when we get off, I want you to stay on just for a minute before we really close. I'm gonna end this, but you stay on, and then and then with some great comments as well. But I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. And once again, I want to thank my big bro, Pastor Jarvis Ellis from the New Direction Christian Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I just want to let everybody know that he's the reason that the Greek Freak decided to stay in the Bucks. He was the moderator and the leader of the prayer committee that kept
lot of prayer.
That kept lot of prayer. Yeah. I know it's a lot of prayer. Y'all, it wasn't looking too good for a minute. I know it's a lot of prayer.
and my church is 5 minutes from the Buck Stadium. Our church is located.
Ain't that something?
God is good. Our church is 5 minutes from downtown and man, maybe 5-6 minutes to the stadium. So God is good.
Amen. I know that's right. But like I said, thank you all so much for tuning in. And once again, you can find Big Bro's personal page, and also you can look up New Direction Christian Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So God bless you. We thank you. We pray we pray that you had a great time like we did too. Until next time.